The Mandalorian Wars were a series of massacres that masked another war, a war of conversion, culminating in a final atrocity that no Jedi could walk away from, save one.
And that is what I sought to understand.
The Mandalorian Wars is a conflict that lasted 16 years between the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders and the Old Republic. It began in 3976 BBY, 2 decades after the end of the Great Sith War. This was a pivotal moment in history for the entire Republic, showing the weakness of the Jedi Order and having repercussions that affected the entire galaxy, eventually bringing the Jedi Order on the brink of total collapse. So today, we're going to dive into the Mandalorian Wars to go deeper and try to get a true understanding of what happened and what influenced it, and what repercussions it could have had. All the background of characters will be up to the Mandalorian Wars, so some characters' backstories will be very short, even though their lore and story is extremely large, and some of the characters' backstories will overlap with sections we've discussed, but this is important to the characters in question. Who was Mandalore the Ultimate? Mandalore the Ultimate was the leader of the Mandalorians during the Mandalorian Wars. He claimed the title of Mandalore when the previous Mandalore had fell. Mandalore the Indomitable fell at the closing of the Great Sith War after failing to invade Onderon and retreating back to Dxun. While escaping, he was shot down in his basilisk war droid and died surrounded by the vicious wildlife the moon was famous for. The Ultimate put on the mask and claimed the title of Mandalore. In the years following the ending of the Great Sith War, Mandalore pushed to claim the title of the Ultimate and to rebuild the clan after they had fractured greatly following their humiliating defeat. Mandalore relentlessly pursued his goal of rebuilding the clan, and while on the planet of Shogun, received a vision about the Tang and foresaw that they were just destined to go extinct, and this would be the end of the Mandalorians. Some would say he truly gained his title of the Ultimate when he responded by recruiting Mandalorians from all different species and planets ranging from humans to Rodians, and transforming the Mandalorians from a species of Tangs to a warrior culture that pursued glory and honour through battle. In 3978 BBY, Mandalore the Ultimate was approached by an unidentified Sith Lord as an emissary for Darth Vigiat, who wanted help with the task in retrieving the remains of his half-brother, Dramath II. After Mandalore helped the emissary find these remains, he was informed by the emissary that Darth Vigiat had a vision of the Mandalorians and that they would attack the Republic and eventually conquer it. Mandalore had already been striving for a grand war to take the Mandalorians to a new level, to allow them to gain honour and glory as was their way. But with the influences of the Sith Lord, this idea was brought closer to fruition, and unfortunately it seemed that the influence of the Sith may not be over after this meeting. Following this meeting, and for the next 2 years, Mandalore proceeded bringing about a number of reforms to bring this vision to reality. He changed who the Mandalorians accepted. Instead of bringing in only Tang warriors, they brought in any warrior who had proved themselves capable and who wanted to follow and uphold the Mandalorian code. Mandalore wanted to change their goal from raiding to conquering by capturing territory and establishing territory and an industrial system that would support the Mandalorians and follow the code. These changes and the devout focus on the Mandalorian traditions and code based heavily on the previous Mandalorian Crusaders transformed them into the Neo-Crusaders and created a more disciplined and well-organised force that would be better suited to follow these new ideals. Mandalore's biggest supporter during this was Cassus Fett, who was the top Mandalorian strategist throughout the war. The Mandalorians focused on building up a fleet and expanding their domain, and as it expanded they started filling their ranks with even more species such as Togruta and Devaronians. The Mandalorians Begin. In 3976 BBY, the first domino falls and the war begins. The Neo-Crusaders began with a raid in the Outer Rim territories, sending a fleet of warships to attack the world of Althir III. Just to clarify, that the war beginning is disputed based on whether the war happened when the Mandalorians started their expansion and attack, or whether or not it began when the Republic started to fight back. However, we're going to be covering the entire section, so we class the war as beginning now, when the Mandalorians started expanding and attacking planets. Althir was not a member of the Republic and was located in the Outer Rim. Despite its independence and lack of allies, the Althiri did not succumb instantly. to the Mandalorian forces but fought back bravely and managed to hold them off for 5 days, keeping them held at the outer rings of their world, which prevent any direct attacks onto their world. This may have lasted longer if not for a unit of Mandalorians under the command of Canderous Ordo, who was ordered to feint the flank of the Althiri to try and break the formation of the Althiri to allow the Mandalorians to surround and finish them off. Canderous failed to follow orders due to an opening in the Althiri flanks that revealed itself, in which Canderous proceeds to launch a frontal assault upon the central fleet. This resulted in the Althiri forces being attacked upon two fronts, and revealing their vulnerable centre after the forces were split in two. Once the forces were split in two and the vulnerable centre was exposed, Canderous commanded his forces to attack the vulnerable centre and annihilate them, even though they were outnumbered 10-1. This caused the surviving Althiri forces to flee in panic, that some even braved the rings of the planet to try and escape. Canderous' actions won the battle for the Mandalorians, but at the cost of a fellow Mandalorian's command called Jaggi, who suffered extreme losses. Following the successful conquering of the planet Althir 3, the planet became one of the first spoils of war that became part of the productive side of Mandalore's desired war machine. Canderous Ordo was also granted command of an entire subsect of Clan Ordo as a reward for his effort breaking the stalemate of the battle. And I'll show you here Canderous' side of the story, his version of events that happened.
I don't have as many strange stories like the last one I told you, but I do have a couple about me and the stuff I've done. In one battle above the world of Althir, my unit managed to defeat a force of Althiri 10 times our own size. That battle gained me command of an entire subsect of my clan. For 5 days, they had managed to hold off our forces, keeping us to the outer rings of their world, preventing us from attacking it directly. My task was to assault one of their flanks with a false attack. The Althiri would be drawn out by the units I had sent in. Once they had surrounded those units, the bulk of my forces would attack from the rear and defeat them in detail. Things didn't go as I had planned. I saw an opening, a mistake they had made in the disposition of their forces, and took it. While fending off our main force, they had let their fleet split in two. The center of their entire fleet was left exposed. I turned my forces and assaulted the center of their fleet, decimating them. Their slow, ponderous ship could not turn to face us without being overwhelmed. The command vessels were destroyed in seconds. Their ranks were thrown into chaos. It was amusing to watch the surviving ships scatter and flee. Several even tried to dive through the plane of the rings to escape us. They were shredded by the rings, or crashed into rocks, or were destroyed by our forces as we pursued them. Warriors do not flee from a battle if they are losing. They fight to the end, as we did against your Jedi Revan. Another time, maybe I'll tell you about how the war with the Republic went. For now, let's just get on with things.
Who was Cassus Fett? Cassus Fett was a human that joined the Mandalorians after the Great Sith War, and was a key figure in the changes that Mandalore the Ultimate strived for. An advocate for some of the key reforms, such as claiming planets to be used as part of the Mandalorian war machine, instead of the previous Mandalorian way of just raiding and pillaging. Fett convinced Mandalore to accept the need for uniforms, declaring that this would help rein in the Mandalorians that were close out of control, and able to distinguish between the different ranks upon the field. Blue uniforms were for the newest recruits, red uniforms were for their senior officers, whereas the golden uniforms were given to Mandalore's top advisors, and Fett was one of the first to don this armour, representing the need to change from individuality to unity. By 3976 BBY, Fett was leading raids on smaller planets and had earned himself the reputation of a master of command within the military, and this allowed him position to lead the invasion of Cathar in 3973 BBY. Three years after the Battle of Althir, in 3973 BBY, Mandalore the Ultimate had made Cassus Fett his top strategist, and granted him permission for his plan to attack Cathar with an army of Basilisk war droids. Cassus Fett's plan was to attack the people of Cathar, a peaceful group, and herd them into the ocean. The Mandalorians were eager for this battle. Cathar was a prime target due to the dishonour the Mandalorians had suffered previously at the hand of the Cathar during the Great Sith War. and this would be a way to reclaim their honour and avenge their previous defeat. The invading attack had caught the people of Cathar off guard. Their fleet came in and instantly began bombardment of the surface, targeting all communication relays and space dock facilities to prevent calls for help or escape, and then they landed, and the battle would truly begin. To call it as a battle is to use the term loosely. Most of the Cathar were unprepared and were defenceless, and unable to fight back. They were not a part of the Republic and had no allies to call on. Once Cassus Fett and his army of Basilisk war droids had herded the Cathar to the ocean, they proceeded to massacre them all, which was so extreme, even a Mandalorian tried to protest the brutality that Cassus claimed was necessary as revenge. But after the slaughter had taken place and the death of many Cathar and the sole Mandalorian who protested, the surviving Cathar now numbered in the hundreds, after up to 90% of them were killed. The ones that survived managed to escape in the few remaining ships and make a break for freedom. Even though a small minority had managed to escape, the horrors that they had suffered made it so many could not even talk about what had happened. The Republic had learnt about the atrocities committed on Cathar, but chose to cover up this information and what the Mandalorians had done. They reasoned that this knowledge may have caused negative effects on the reconstruction efforts that were taking place after the Great Sith War. Even with the corrupt cover-up of the genocide, the Republic mobilised their navy to guard some key systems that the Mandalorians were linked to, such as Dxun, still the home of some of the most defiant clans from the previous war. Taris was another, one due to its location on the Mandalorian Road, which linked important places such as Mandalore and Coruscant. The 8 years of unchecked rampaging. Even after the Republic's mobilisation of their navy, the Mandalorians were unhindered in their efforts and proceeded to carry on raiding planets such as Coruscant and Azure, using their navy for expanding their territory into Hutt space on the east side of the galaxy, as well as into the Tion hegemony, capturing systems such as the Liana system, and capturing the Maycum and Quirmia systems, using the Palermian trade route to gain access to these systems. Then using the Overic Grip Link hyper route, they travelled southeast to capture the Kael'ta system first, then the Flawn system. The Republic's lack of action meant that the Mandalorians were able to expand in multiple directions, so while they captured Kael'ta and Flawn, they'd also launched a secondary campaign to capture the Gemini system, then south to the Cymirth system. This was all done from the Liana system, that allowed them to go into Hutt space again to capture the Taskid system and conquering the Denegra system, followed by the Natine system. The Hutts then realised they needed to try something to fight back, and due to the nature of the enemies knew, they needed some sort of army to mount a defence and proceeded to hire mercenary armies to try and combat the Mandalorians. Unfortunately, this backfired, as many of the mercenaries got absorbed into the Mandalorians' own ranks rather than fighting them. There were talks about using bioweapons to give themselves an easier time, but this was quickly shut down by the majority of Mandalorians who believed this went against everything they believed in, everything their ideals and culture stood for. To prepare themselves for the planned advance in the Mid-Rim, a supply post was established on the Kael'd planet named Unity. Even with all the successes that the Mandalorians were faced with, one Mandalorian had started becoming disillusioned with the actions and started questioning the motives of Mandalore and some of his top advisors. Specifically, Dr Demagol, whose actions were kept very secretive during this time. Demagol was a Zeltron male born as Antos Wyrick as a child after Zeltron was invaded by the Mandalorians during the Great Sith War, and seeing the power of Mandalore the Indomitable, who taught many of the Zeltron martial arts himself, was shocked when Ulic Queldroma defeated Mandalore in single combat. Demagol, shocked at Mandalore's defeat, was adamant on discovering why, and after managing to break into Queldroma's quarters, he discovered some robes that he carried with him. Unable to start his research until many years later after the Arcanians kicked out all aliens from their community, partnering up with the Arcanian offshoot community, he was able to start his research. Discovering that the robe had in fact belonged to Arca Jeth, an Arcanian Jedi hero, but without the proper resources to dedicate himself fully to this, he went to the Mandalorians who had brought him and his people into the fold, and asked for the resources dedicated to this project and research. The Mandalorians granted this, and Demagol set up a fake school to deceive others from the true objective to create an army of clone Jedi Knights for the Mandalorians using the DNA from Arca Jeth. He only succeeded once in this mission, and created a death set from 2 of his offshoot researchers. After being betrayed by the Crucible, the slaving organisation he'd been using to kidnap more people for his experiments, he had to disappear, and rejoined the Mandalorians in the disguise of Dr Demagol for the same purpose of studying the Jedi further. Who was Commander Rohlan Dyre, or Rohlan the Questioner? Rohlan was a human Mandalorian and a veteran from the Mandalorian Crusader days, but during the early days of the Mandalorian Wars, he started to question the motives and tactics of the Mandalorians. Unlike previously, the Mandalorians were doing what he believed to be a false war, in which their tactics and motives seemed less about conquering and invading, but more about testing and trying the tactics and force of the Republic. These tactics did not align with the Mandalorian way, and so he decided to question his superiors, asking why this was the cause, but no answer he was given was satisfactory, and in the end he decided to desert by ignoring the summons for the next battle. Captured and dragged back, his punishment was to fight on the front lines, yet he still continued to refuse, and had to be captured and dragged back a total of 5 times before the Battle of Vanquor. The Republic finally makes a move. In 3966 BBY, the Republic finally made its move to fight back and stop the oncoming Mandalorian horde. However, this decision was one made out of self-interest rather than defiance in the name of protecting the planets that were suffering. The resource worlds based around Taris were being threatened, the systems of Jebble, Vanquor, Tarnith and Surja. Once threatened, the Republic created the Jebble Vanquor Tarnith line, which was a protective cordon located around these 3 systems. There were 2 main admirals responsible for keeping these systems protected: Jamas Veltra and Norma Somos, veterans of the Great Sith War, who had fought valiantly and were entrusted with holding the line during their previous service. By 3965 BBY, the Mandalorians' relentless progress was finally halted by the Republic. The Republic's forces that were stationed around Taris had finally halted the progress in the Outer Rim. Finally, with some sort of opposition, the Mandalorians went 8 months without a victory. They pivoted to move along the Mandalorian Road and captured planet Flashpoint, the home of what would become Demagol's research station for experimenting on Jedi Flashpoint. Stellar Research Station. Following the capture of Flashpoint, months later the Mandalorians wanted to go into their next conquest with Surja in their sights, which was within the Jebble Vanquor Tarnith line, so another attempt to start taking the Republic's territory, but like before, the Mandalorians were halted again, this time by Republic forces, under the command of Captain Saul Karath, and while the Mandalorians were stopped, there was no definite winner. 3 more battles were fought at Surja over the following 6 weeks, but yet again, there was no definite winner or loser of these conflicts. Who was Captain Saul Karath? Saul Karath was a native to Corellia, a human who lived a normal life, taking a paternal role towards his siblings. After losing his father during the Great Sith War, Saul went and volunteered for the Republic Navy. Not old enough to serve though, nor privileged to have the connections to join, Saul managed to win the attention of a fleet captain who allowed Saul to serve as a non-commissioned captain steward aboard the fleet captain's ship, the Reliance I. Eventually old enough to serve, Saul had many successes, but unfortunately was followed by setbacks every time. But regardless, he was devoted to the Navy and looked upon them as his family, and believed in what he and the Navy were doing. Saul clawed his way up to the position of captain, and finally earned his first command upon the Reciprocity. While on the Reciprocity, he spent much of his time fighting off pirates while guarding convoys. While on missions, he recognised the abilities of one of his pilots, Cartho Nasi, and invited him to serve with him when he was promoted to his tactical command ship, named the Courageous. The idea of Revanchism. Many had seen the Mandalorians' rapid expansion and their relentless onslaught of systems and fleets building up their war machine, and this had made many believe that now was the time to retaliate and stop the Mandalorians. There was a young Jedi who was very charismatic, and he advocated for this. He advocated Revanchism, even though many of the Order, including the Jedi High Council, were very hostile about this, advocating and believed that these ideas and potential actions would lead to the dark side. The young Jedi was encouraged by their master, Kreia, With this encouragement, the young Jedi believed his actions were right and challenged the Jedi Council, and not just challenged them, but started gathering followers from the Jedi who felt the same way, including his friend Alek. This new movement of Jedi became known as the Revanchists, and the Republic media hailed this young Jedi as the Jedi's own Crusader. Even with all this support, the Jedi Council still asked for patience and to not get involved. The Revanchists defied the Council's wishes and left to scout the battlefront. They arrived at Taris to recruit any of the Jedi there because at the time there were 5 Masters, all were Padawans. They failed, so they proceeded on their way, this time to Serja, to where some of the latest conflict had been. After Serja, they went looking for Mandalorian activity on the moon of Dxun in Onderon. They went there unprepared and were punished greatly by an ambush led by Rohlan Dyre. Alek and many of the Revanchists were captured and brought to Flashpoint to Demagol, where they faced horrors in the name of experimentation. Taris had been stable with their agreement with the Republic, and being the home of a Jedi Tower with 5 Masters, this granted them safety. However, the 5 Masters were part of a subsect called the Covenant, who used their foresight to determine great evils. They had killed 4 of the Padawans, with the final one escaping. The Padawan Zayne Carricks was framed for this and was captured, but managed to escape after making allies to try and plead his innocence to them, and they allowed him to escape. The uproar this had caused meant the Jedi Council had summoned the 5 Masters back to Coruscant, which left Taris wholly undefended, as the Mandalorians were very wary of the Jedi forces, and hearing about the withdrawal from Taris knew that this now was the time to begin the invasion of the Republic in force. In 3964 BBY, Mandalore the Ultimate began ordering his forces to end the 8-month stalemate, beginning with the Battle of Vanquor. The attack on Vanquor was the beginning of the Mandalorians' plan for their overall target of Taris. Vanquor was one of the 3 systems in the Jebble Vanquor Tarnith line that was formed for the protection of Taris from the oncoming Mandalorian forces. The attack on Vanquor was part of their overall plan to divert the forces in the line. This attack was led by Commander Rohlan Dyre. The shock infantry landed among the mining camps around the mountains. Many of the army attacked in vehicles prepared for vehicular warfare, such as the Basilisk war droids, scout speeders, and Meteor-class Q carriers. Dyre left the battle early on due to capturing Zayne Carricks, the fugitive from Taris, and an Arcanian called Jarail, a companion of Carricks whom Dyre believed was a Jedi and would be taken to Demagol. The Mandalorians met minimal resistance and did not have any issues on their progress when invading. Cassus Fett was also taking part, had set up an orbital screen to allow the major settlements to be attacked. The overall goal of this attack was to lure in the flank of the Republic Navy from the line. The ground invasion went off without a hitch, but in the systems above there was a battle between the Mandalorian forces and the Republic Navy, led by Captain Saul Karath, which had control of the centre of the Republic line, while an effective commander and a resourceful one of the Republic forces. The Mandalorians held him off and he had to retreat, which allowed the conquest of Vanquor. Taking Vanquor was extremely effective, giving them a stronghold on the rim that allowed them better access to other systems, including Taris. They were ready to set up their forthcoming attack. Not all of the Mandalorian forces had headed to Vanquor. Some had broken through the cordon due to the line being split, and used this to their advantage to head towards Taris. Year 3963 BBY, Veltra and Somers had withdrawn their forces closer to Taris and reformed them into a new defensive line, but unfortunately this could not stop the Mandalorians from besieging them in their goal to get to Taris. Veltra fell when his flagship was destroyed, and Summers was wounded greatly and had to be evacuated to the Wayland system to recover. The Mandalorians had finally reached Taris, and they had their dreadnoughts bombard their planet, which was the start of the devastation that lasted weeks, which was a precursor for the Mandalorians to start landing and invading the planet. Taris had very minimal defense forces, and were not able to do much to stop the invading forces. However, this did not stop the inhabitants from forming resistance movements through the swoop gangs such as the Hidden Becks from the lower levels of Taris and the Taris police force, who had both come together to fight back. Flashpoint Station. After the ambush and capture of the Revanchist followers, the Jedi Council were unable to completely stay out the conflict and requested the young Jedi Crusader to go and save the captured Jedi from Onderon's system, who were currently on Flashpoint Station. The Jedi Crusader did not complete this task as he was beaten to this by Zayne Carricks, who had caused great issues for the Mandalorians when they had managed to trick them and allow the prisoners to overthrow their captors. The Revanchist and Alek tried to capture Demagol but were tricked when he switched armour with Rohlan Dyre, and instead he slipped aboard the last resort. The young Jedi Crusader may have failed to save his followers, but once reunited, he carried on his campaign, and yet again was hailed as the saviour of the Republic and praised as the leader of the Revanchism movement, eventually becoming known as the Revanchist. The Revanchist followed his belief of advocating his message to all and met a Cathar Jedi named Pharaoh, who told the leader about the lack of Cathar on his homeworld. This sparked the Revanchist's next goal of investigating what had happened to the inhabitants, and they began investigating and looking for any evidence to what had happened to the population. The Mandalorians Advance. Once the Mandalorians were besieging Taris, they wanted to up the pressure and started attacking through multiple invasion corridors that went through 3 sectors that were adjacent, which was an offensive strategy referred to as the Onslaught, due to the effective nature of the attacks it allowed. Along the west of the Outer Rim, they captured Zongaloo, a system without much resistance, and then they sent several attacks along the Republic's northern territory, taking multiple Zabrak colonies. Ord Mantell an attack on Ethor that, due to a successful counterattack by the Republic, was halted and stopped, and the Mandalorians were repelled. The Mandalorians failed to take Ethor, but their attack on the Zabrak homeworld of Iridonia was successful, and while occupying, they recruited some of the natives into their ranks. Eventually, the Republic and Zabrak forces liberated the planet, and the Mandalorians had a permanent presence on the society that remained. The Mandalorians followed up with attacks on a second corridor in which they attacked Wayland, bombarding the surface and destroying many factories and colonists. The third invasion corridor was aimed at the core worlds. They captured Jebble and used the planet to build a war force to supply the Mandalorian offensive, and was a key staging point that allowed them to prepare for an attack on Onderon. The Battle of Jebble, 3963 BBY. Commonly referred to as a disaster on Jebble due to the nature of what took place. The invasion and capture of Jebble was not an issue nor difficult, but when they were landing there, a Mandalorian by the name of Pulsifer, who worked for Demagol, was sent looking for Force artifacts due to his fascination with them, and he managed to find an artifact named the Myr Talisman on the planet of Taris in the Undercity. After successfully finding the artifact, Pulsifer went to Jebble to meet the rest of the Mandalorians on Jebble. Once on Jebble, the artifact bonded with Pulsifer and reacted by turning all the Mandalorians near him into Rakghouls, but unlike normal, Pulsifer was able to control these Rakghouls. These Rakghouls were able to keep using their skills and abilities they had prior to turning. On this planet at the time, Zayne Carricks was there chasing down an agent of the Jedi Covenant that had previously slaughtered the 4 Padawans on Taris. The agent Celeste Morn sacrificed herself and took on wearing the artifact to stop the destruction it was causing. With Zayne Carricks' help, she was able to control herself and stop the control from the Sith Talisman. Celeste allowed herself to be enclosed in the Oobleet that had enclosed Remulus Draper. Celeste was stuck on the planet and left there in stasis for thousands of years, as when she was enclosed, the Rakghouls went wild, and after Carrick had escaped and Cassus Fett arrived, he instantly bombarded the planet from orbit, rather than risking any more troops or risk of the plague leaving the planet. The Devestation of Serroco, 3963 BBY. The Mandalorians' unrelenting assault instigated the Galactic Republic to finally mobilise the entire Navy to move in and try and counter the threat. While the Republic was busy doing this, the Mandalorians carried on moving forward, striking at Isis and their walled cities in the Onderon system, and taking it and the moon of Dxun. This was poetic justice for the failed retreat there at the end of the Great Sith War that led to the end of Mandalore the Indomitable. Onderon and Dxun, now under Mandalorian control, became key positions in the conflict, being used as staging points. The Republic fleets that were still in the Outer Rim fell back to the rest of the Navy located in the core worlds. Karath was given control of the battle group tasked with defending Serroco that were gathering at the planet of Althir. Karath needed to successfully defend Serroco as it was the next in line from Jebble to try and form a good defensive formation. He set up camps right next to the stone cities of the local Sterib. While the reason for doing so was unknown, this provoked Mandalore, who took this tactic as an honourless defence, insulting the Mandalorians by assuming they would not attack civilian cities, and to return the insult he decided to show that this was not the case to teach the Republic a lesson. Serroco was a monumental moment in the Mandalorian Wars, and one that would not be forgotten. It had Zayne Carricks the fugitive still on the run after being accused of murdering the Padawans on Taris. It had Saul Karath, who was now promoted to Rear Admiral. Zayne Carricks had a Force vision while on Serroco, foreseeing the Mandalorian invasion, and even though he was wanted, he still wanted to warn the Republic and Karath, and he tried to do this by boarding Lieutenant Cartho Nassi's ship. Unfortunately, Karath did not trust him after seeing Carrick heading from Vanquor, previously into Mandalorian space, believing him to be a traitor. He tried to get Alek to vouch for him, but unfortunately he was too late, and the Mandalorian fleet had arrived at the system. Karath had his fleet prepare for the incoming missiles and get the shields ready to counterattack, but he had not predicted the real target, the Mandalorian warheads that fired directly at the surface of Serroco, hitting near 27 population centres and devastated most of the Sterib cities. Not only did it hit the civilian population, it devastated the majority of the Republic ships that were currently on the surface as they were taken unaware. The casualties were so great that Jedi galaxy-wide felt the deaths through the Force. The death toll would have been higher, but even though Karath did not believe Carrick, Carth Nasi did, and he managed to call an emergency evacuation to 17 Sterib cities, who took shelter underground. A Revanchism Jedi named Meetra Surik, who was on the planet at the time, managed to escape on one of the few remaining vessels that escaped the system before the destruction. Karath and his forces, after seeing the Sterib cities being turned into glass craters, had very few options and chose to retreat to try and find better ground to fight back. The Mandalorians pursued them from Serroco towards Telarath. The Mandalorians finally cornered the Republic fleet and boarded Karath's vessel. With little chance remaining, they managed to flee and ended up teaming up with Carrick, who created an opportunity to escape. This allowed an escape with Carth Onasi flying the survivors away. That included Karath, Carrick and Morvis. The Mandalorians had won. The Republic had faced a costly defeat, losing the entirety of the battle group that was protecting Serroco. This defeat and devastation would become a rallying cry throughout the galaxy to all those who would stand against the Mandalorians. This was critical in raising more support, as the Mandalorians were closing on the core worlds. Systems close to Serroco, such as Telarath, who would be next in line of the Mandalorians' crosshairs. Mandalore himself was said to be wielding a battle axe, made from the remains of Karath's destroyed flagship, the Courageous. Who was Alek? Alek was born on the planet Quelli, in the village of Squingua Gesimus, having to escape the devastation wrought on his homeworld by the Mandalorians once. He came to the Republic, his village name was given to him as his surname. Discovered to be Force sensitive, he became a Jedi Padawan, training on Dantooine, and eventually given the nickname of Squint, a shortened and more pronounceable version of his surname. Alek would eventually become friends with the young Jedi Crusader who would go on to lead the Revanchists. Alek was noted to be the weaker of the two, but with a thirst to broaden his knowledge and was trained by Zar Lestin just like the Revanchist Crusader. Alek and his friend both opposed the Mandalorian invasion adamantly, and he was the first to join the Revanchist movement. Alek started even calling the young Revanchist his honorary master, which foreshadowed what would come to pass. The First Battle of Omonoth, 3963 BBY. After the defeat at Serroco, Lord Arko Adaska of Adaska Biomechanical Corporation of Arcania had sent summons to both Mandalore, the Republic, and the Revanchists, and sent summons to an auction for a biological weapon that he had scientists developed from a space slug named Exogorths. In the time it took for the two groups to respond and go at the auction, the Mandalorians had caused untold devastation on Noan and captured Dagri Minor. One of the notable Jedi fighting on Dagri Minor was in fact Meetra Surik. Lord Adaska, after seeing the desperation of the groups and trying to stop him from picking the opposing side, went another route and instead declared himself as a new galactic power. This would have caused catastrophic events throughout the galaxy. However, he was stopped and took down by Carth Onasi, Zayne Carricks, and Lucien Dyre. Lucien Dyre was Carrick's original master and one of the perpetrators of the Padawan massacre that had made Carrick a fugitive. This took place as he was a member of a group called the Covenant, a group of Jedi who used their foresight to predict events to try and prevent them. The Covenant had seen a vision of the destruction of the Republic and the Jedi Order by summoning red armour. The moment this group had this vision, the Padawans were all dressed in red and they believed this was a sign that one of them would be responsible. Karath returned to the Republic after the failed auction and handed his resignation in after what he believed was his failures at the Battle of Serroco. But the Admiral refused to accept it and instead gave him command of a newly built class tactical command ship and commanded Karath. Cassus Fett had been fighting the resistance on Taris while the auction was ongoing, and by the time the auction had ended was already attacking the resistance in the lower city. The advance is finally halted. Even though Adaska had failed, and his Arcadian legacy was destroyed, this did not stop the Mandalorians and the Republic from fighting over the remains, trying to claim any potential advantage they could. The conflict was inconclusive, however. There was a battle that happened concurrently on Meetra that ended in the favour of the Mandalorians, who were still continuing their campaign from Wayland. There were 2,000 casualties overnight suffered by the Republic. The Republic managed to retrieve a set of Mandalorian assault armour to try and study for potential weaknesses that they could take advantage of. The Mandalorians progressed from Meetra to conquer the Thustra system, and followed by capturing the Obra Sky system, and they would have advanced further if the incident on Jebble had not happened. This catastrophe stopped the plan for the Core World advance. The Jedi Order was in disarray. After replacing a council member, the former council member who had fallen in love with a Mandalorian defected to try and make the Mandalorians a better group with better motivations. Several Jedi went along with him. His replacement was Lucien Dre, who went after the Revanchism and issued many arrest warrants to stop them in their actions. Vindication followed shortly after the arrest warrants, in which a Jedi Covenant member, the true leader Hazan, tried to overthrow the Jedi Council and bombarded Coruscant. He was stopped, and this incident was covered up and blame was put on the Mandalorians. Hazan being defeated also brought into light the innocence of Zayne Carricks. The birth of Revan and Malak. Alek was the Revanchism's strongest follower, being the first to follow him, and once the arrest warrants went out, his name was one of the ones provided. To try and get around this and avoid arrest, he changed his name at that point from Alek to Malak. The Revanchism Crusader, Alek, and the Revanchism proceeded to go to Cathar to follow up on their previous investigations after speaking to Ferro, previously who had mentioned his missing people. The Revanchism were confronted on the planet by the Jedi Council, who had arrived in force as one of them, Master Vandor Takar, had received a vision that had shown a great destruction that the galaxy was going to suffer through the war. The Council went on in great criticism detailing that the Mandalorians were no threat, but any involvement would cause much death and destruction. However, as the Council confronted the Revanchism, one of them stepped on a mask, and as the Revanchism picked up the mask, all those present had a shared vision, in which they witnessed the massacre that took place in Cathar, and even saw the protests of the sole Mandalorian. This vision disgusted the Revanchism, who then donned the mask he stood on and decided to adopt a new name too. He now was Revan. In the face of all the visions they all shared, the Council were unable to deny the Revanchism intervention and finally sanctioned them. However, they still publicly denounced them, stating they were acting too hastily and unwise. Revan, to appease the Council, suggested reviving the Mercy Corps from the Sith War, in which Jedi are able to be deputized to serve alongside the Republic military as healers, and the Council surprisingly agreed, and the Revanchism movement became the official Mercy Corps under the direct command of Revan. Revan and Malak were officially appointed as generals and worked together with Captain Teletor in the months following the Revanchism movement battled the Mandalorians openly alongside the Republic. In the following battles, Revan proved himself through several victories as a proficient military leader. The Mandalorian Jedi. At the birth of the year 3962 BBY, Dojanda Case, the former Jedi Council member and leader of the Mandalorian Knights now serving the Mandalorians, put forth a plan to Mandalore. This plan was to help provide the Mandalorians their own Jedi by kidnapping younglings from the Jedi Enclave. Case had supported Mandalore's advance and suggested Essene for a system to capture. Once captured, Case, still seen as a loyal son of the Republic, lured the Republic there and fought the local militias under the command of Captain Morvis. The local militia believed they had the advantage and chased down the fleeing Mandalorians, which was the moment the trap was sprung, and the Mandalorians dropped down on basilisk war droids, led by the Mandalorian Knights. Captain Morvis' militia were forced to draft into the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders. Case led the Mandalorian Knights in a campaign directing straight to Dantooine, starting with the target of Halthir. They began assaulting a signal station that was manned by Grand's native to Halthorian. Case blackmailed Carrick into helping, who faked a viral outbreak to get access, and allowed the Mandalorians to capture the station easily. Case and his knights proceeded to Dantooine, capturing the embassy and preparing to evacuate the younglings, but this was foiled by Carrick and Captain Morvis' militia. Carrick had to duel Case to manage to convince him to surrender once he learned that Mandalore's support had been withdrawn. The loss of the Mandalorian Knights meant that the Mandalore had to abandon the northern offensive, and that his forces on Halthor had to be withdrawn. For service provided by Zayne Carricks, he was given the position as lieutenant and a special diplomatic status as an agent of Morvis' reciprocity, to work as a conscience for the Republic. Mandalorian Triumph. The Mandalorians' campaign here began with them conquering the border world known as Eris III. Their destruction entailed them setting fire to the Dxun plains. they drove back Meetra Surik's forces that won the world. The fires on the Dxun plains were so great, they carried on for over a decade. The Mandalorians progressed from Zeris III through the Dernitine system, going along the lesser Lantillian route, and proceeded to conquer the Charos system. They then went through the Randan Run in an attempt to try and conquer the Randan systems due to its key position at the intersection of many routes, but they faced defeat by the Republic. After the defeat, they bounced back and raided Azua, and afterwards went for the planet Contrum, then proceeded along the Vathkri trade corridor and captured the Geyser system. The Mandalorian Triumph did not end there. The campaign then focused on the Nazri system, then the Venus system. The Mandalorians grouped with additional forces at their stronghold of Dxun, and from there captured the Ambria system and the Zell system. The addition of the Jedi to the war effort, the Republic revealed a range of warships that they had been developing during the war to allow a better counteract against the Mandalorian fleet. The Mandalorians, after their victory at the Zell system, went to the Commoner system and smashed the Republic task force that was stationed there. From the victory, they conquered the Queller system. The fight that took place in the Queller system was on a minor farm world named Chur. This fighting resulted in the Republic suffering heavy losses. After another Mandalorian victory, their campaign seemed to be unstoppable, with them taking the Exodine system. But this is where they began to face difficulties after being repelled when attacking the Lantilles system. They then proceeded to Duro. The Battle of Duro was not really described as a battle, but more of a slaughter. There were not many records about the battle. The Mandalorians sent their assault force to attack Duro using many crafts to land on the planet, coming down extremely rapidly and causing great destruction. The Mandalorians laid waste to the planet, destroying nearly the entire planet. Once they had caused the destruction, they forcibly conscripted the population to join their forces, ready to battle the Republic. The Mandalorians wanted Duro for the potential for conscripted forces, while also their vast amount of resources and war materials from the shipyards that orbited the planet Duro. They would have been successful, but they were stopped by the arrival of Revan and Malak in a command of a fleet. The arrival of the fleet allowed the Republic to stop the Mandalorians from cutting off the Corellian trade spine, which was a major trade route that the Republic needed. Following this defeat, the Supreme Chancellor, Tol Kressa, was pressured into a point in Revan's supreme command of the Republic military. The Empress Tita's interest. A fleet of Mandalorian warships attacked the Tabata mining planet of Bespin. This was a mining effort set up by the Empress Tita system, a distant but carbonite-rich planet. They destroyed most of the operations that had been set up to try and prevent the Republic from receiving any Tibana gas from Bespin. Following this attack, and the Mandalorians' corward push, the Mandalorians entered the Kola system, which had a red supergiant system on the edge of the deep core, close to the Empress Tita system, renowned for being a starship graveyard. The Mandalorians, though, discovered a Jedi temple and a mobile hospital hiding there as a ship named the Sanctuary, which was under the command of the Master Val Issa, who would use the system to hide. However, this did not last the entirety of the war, and the Mandalorians, after finding it, attacked. Master Val Issa, famed for being eccentric, managed to hold off the attackers long enough for her students to escape, but unfortunately she eventually fell in the fighting, and the Sanctuary was locked in orbit around the supergiant, unable to escape after being half destroyed. Who is Meetra Surik? Meetra Surik, who in the future would be known as the Exile, a Jedi trained on Dantooine and taken as an informal Padawan by the Jedi Knight Kavar. He influenced her greatly, and it's reflected by her following in his footsteps when he went off to fight in the Mandalorian Wars in some of the earlier skirmishes. She was trained by a variety of masters due to her strength. One such master was Vima Sunrider, the daughter of Nomi Sunrider, a famous Jedi of the Old Republic. Master Sunrider often warned Surik to be careful of her new powers, as most importantly, her gift for severing another's connection to the Force. As many Jedi heard of the suffering that the Outer Rim was facing from the Mandalorian assault, Surik was driven to follow her mentor Kavar into battling against the Mandalorians. Surik was recruited into Revan's faction of Jedi by Malak. She left her responsibilities behind, including her prospective Padawan, Mikul. She became one of Revan's most trusted generals during the war. She was skilled in battle and knowledgeable in warfare, and demonstrated this through many of the war's bloodiest campaigns and battles, such as on Dxun, which ended in countless casualties. She even managed to become a Jedi Knight during the war, but no records of how this was accomplished are kept. Surik had attained such trust and respect from Revan that she was given the responsibility of giving the order and activating the mass shadow generator created by Baudu on Malachor V.
We fought against the Republic forces for some time, over the course of many battles. At the start, they were not much of a threat to speak of. But once the Jedi Revan took charge, things began to turn against us. The Republic fleets began to use more than just basic tactics. Feints, counterattacks, mass deceptions. Revan was a genius on the field. Revan abandoned worlds of their defenders so that others would be too fortified to strike, and was willing to make sacrifices in order to advance goals. And in the end, Revan proved too much for us. There was no one else. The entire Republic had committed its forces behind Revan. The Sith had retreated back to their empire, and there were none else strong enough to challenge us. It looked like the entire galaxy was within our grasp. I still remember that final battle in the skies above Malachor V. The two fleets filling the space around it, outshining the stars. Yeah, we lost. But there is no shame in it. We lost to the greatest single warrior the Republic has ever known. It was not your ships, or your men, or your vaunted fight for freedom that won this, the final battle of the war. It was by the actions of one person, the Jedi Revan, that you prevailed. His strategies and tactics defeated the best of us. Even Mandalore himself was taken aback by the ferocity of his attacks, the tenacity of his defenses, and the subtleties of his plans. He fought us to a standstill, and then began pushing back. We really didn't have a chance. It was what we had wanted all along, in a way. We wanted to fight the best, in a battle that would be remembered for centuries. And we did. And Revan won. I don't hold a grudge against Revan, and neither do any of my people. It was the greatest moment of my life to be in that battle. If Revan had been a Mandalorian, nothing in the galaxy would have stopped us. But wishing for the past to be different is useless. Better look to the future, as we should now. We'll talk more later, I think.
The counter-offensive of the Republic, 3961 BBY to 3960 BBY. As Supreme Command of the Republic forces, Revan directed the Navy into taking the offensive against the Mandalorians, achieving some important victories such as liberating Taris. Revan spearheaded the charge, leading a group of Jedi and managed to end the lengthy siege and occupation of the world. Revan and his group battled the Mandalorians in the Taris Undercity. Revan during the battle freed a group of slaves from the Undercity. The Republic started winning countless victories after Revan took command, but while the victories started building up, Revan's morality started to change as he became willing to sacrifice populations and key planets to allow the Republic to win victories in other systems. Revan also recognised the importance of the Republic's industrial might. The morality of both Revan and Malak had changed, and their policy was aimed to adopt a victory at all cost mentality. On Dantooine, the pair discovered the ancient ruins of the Rakatan species and the star map that showed hints that would eventually lead them to a space station known as the Star Forge. The pair had gone looking for more hints of the Star Forge and eventually discovered the Trace Academy on Malachor V, in which the pair started falling to the dark side after being seduced by the teachings. Even after falling, they still led the Republic in the battles against the Mandalorians. The Battle of Blood Ridge. The Battle of Blood Ridge was not a massive battle, and not one with lots of casualties or even great impact on the war, but it is one that represented the tenacity of the Mandalorians and showed their determination to fight and earn their honour in the Mandalorian ways. The Mandalorians fought for several weeks while slowly losing ground, and were ordered to abandon the planet and regroup in a different system. A young recruit named War Mugen refused and asked the volunteers to help him hold a fortified position. The small group of Mandalorians led by War Mugen held a fortified position for several days, while fighting off a much larger force of Jedi on the planet Verthor. The fortified position was named Blood Ridge after the skirmish. The Mandalorians holding Blood Ridge distracted much of the Jedi forces while the rest of Mugen's forces set up positions in several other positions to mount a counterattack. This did not cause great impact, but it showed that even without the Force and Jedi, the Mandalorians were able to demonstrate their ability as a fearsome foe. The plan that Mugen had created was sketched on a tabard from a piece of leather cut from it, and became a symbol of courage and determination to many of the clans. After the Republic's eventual success, they attacked the Vorzid system and then split their forces and successfully captured the Stenov system and their Elom system. The other offense attacking the Lukaszeg system was driven back, but the Republic achieved great success in Mandalorian space, winning 3 out of the 4 conflicts they had aimed for. The Republic would then proceed to Jaga's cluster. The Battle of Jaga's cluster, 3961 BBY to 3960 BBY. One of the last battles that were fought in the Mandalorian Wars. This battle caused Cassus Fett to gain infamy throughout the galaxy, becoming the most wanted man in the galaxy after fighting a Republic fleet commander in hand-to-hand combat and killing him. The victory of the Mandalorians was one of their final ones before their upcoming demise. This battle ended in disaster for the Republic, who had been winning many battles with the help of the Jedi commanders such as Revan and Malak. Even with their presence, the Republic lost this battle and Cassus Fett had won. And this would be remembered throughout. The Battle of Althir, 3962 BBY to 3960 BBY. There are not many records of this battle either, but at this point Revan was a lot more ruthless and cutthroat than he was at the start. He had gone down the path of sacrificing one planet for another, and at the second Battle of Althir he demonstrated his willingness to do what he needed to gain victory. Revan's forces annihilated most of the Mandalorians' ground forces in this conflict, and it demonstrated the effectiveness of Revan, but also foreshadowed his future. Having fallen very far away from the Jedi ideals of saving life and preserving life as much as possible, Revan instead achieved great success, but had also done it at the cost of a lot of his morality, and this was definitely going to foreshadow the ending of the war coming up. The battles of Onderon and Dxun. Dxun had become a heavily fortified Mandalorian stronghold since they took control. Revan ordered forces to retake the planet by a large-scale assault to take the moon Dxun, which was always known as a notorious Mandalorian stronghold even before, since the Great Sith War. The Mandalorians, having control of their moon for decades, used this to their advantage, to establish defences and fortifications to ensure protection of their stronghold. The defences included anti-air turrets, minefields, traps, and the fearsome beasts of Dxun themselves. To try and counteract the anti-air turrets, Revan deployed battle droids on the moon to try and take out the turrets to stop them. Revan's forces were under the command of Meetra Surik, the Jedi General, who was tasked to probe the Mandalorian defences by undertaking hundreds of small unit feints. Even with all the preparations and plans the Republic had, Surik suffered great casualties when her forces charged at the Mandalorian emplacements, but this was protected by a minefield which, even with the great losses, Surik was able to carry out Revan's plans. The Mandalorians refused to surrender their stronghold, and their endurance allowed them to hold out for months. The Republic suffered great casualties, and many veterans of the battle have said that for every 10 soldiers the Republic lost, the Mandalorians lost 1. This victory, while costly, allowed the Republic to drive the Mandalorians back to the Outer Rim. Even with all the deaths that was suffered, especially due to the charging at the minefield, this showed the end of the war was near.
Dreamt of Malachor. I remember the ships, the last stand of the Republic. The tattered remnants of our fleet, the largest we could gather. But it was damaged, weakened, and vulnerable. The Mandalorians couldn't resist. They tore into us like beasts, shredding our ships to scrap as we fought back. Yet this time there were no reinforcements for either side. Revan had been delayed out system by Mandalorian scout ships. By the time she arrived, it was too late, and beyond Malachor there were no more Mandalorians left to die. I remember standing on the bridge with you and watching the destruction of the Republic, watching ships full of soldiers and Jedi burn and die. I remember the look you had when you turned to me. It was the longest you'd ever looked at me. You didn't say anything, just a nod. Events moved quickly then, even in my dreams. Flashes, explosions, you falling. I could feel the pain around me. And then the memory, the drifting hulks of the Mandalorian ships, the dead, allies, friends, strangers. And then the echo, lingering, the sound I awakened to in my nightmares.
The showdown at Malachor V, 3960 BBY. This was the ending of the war. This was the culmination of everything that had happened over the last 16 years. This was the final showdown. Revan had by this point driven the Mandalorians dramatically back, and after eventually retaking the Liana system, he knew that he had to take drastic action and decided it was time to force the final confrontation. The greatest conflict in the Mandalorian Wars, the last stand of the Republic's forces after the Long War, were vulnerable, and the Mandalorians could not resist. A Zabrak engineer named Bao Dur had designed a superweapon that was prepared in secrecy for Revan named the Mass Shadow Generator, which was a gravitational weapon. This weapon was deployed at Malachor V as the coup de grace, intended to bring a final end to the conflict. The Republic's forces were split in two, Revan taking command of half hanging around outside the Malachor system intended to come in and provide support to Surik. Meetra Surik was tasked with luring the Mandalorians into range of the superweapon, as well as activating the Mass Shadow Generator. Revan's forces were unfortunately delayed greatly by a Mandalorian scouting party, so when they did enter the Malachor system, a great battle was already taking place between Mandalore and Surik's forces. Once Revan and his forces arrived, Mandalore could see the defeat was coming, with the arrival of the reinforcements, and challenged Revan to single combat aboard his flagship. Revan accepted the challenge, and then began a duel to the death with Mandalore. Mandalore the Ultimate fought, and even with all his strength he could not overcome Revan, and he fell to the Supreme Commander. Mandalore the Ultimate, while dying at Revan's feet, took off his mask and explained the vision that he had been shown by the Sith, and that this manipulation was a big driving force to go into war. Mandalore even provided the coordinates to the planet where he'd found the remains of Vitiart's brother Dramath II. Revan took the mask of Mandalore, the symbol of leadership throughout Mandalorian culture, and took it so a new Mandalore could not be chosen. Instead it would go to him as spoils of war. Revan's defeat of Mandalore gave the Republic their reason to start pressing the Mandalorian fleet closer to Malachor V. Even with the ambush and the defeat of Mandalore, the Republic was suffering heavy casualties. The heavy casualties were too much for Meetra Surik, who gave the order for Bao Dur to activate the Mass Shadow Generator. Even though both Surik and Revan's ships were out of range, most of the Mandalorian fleet and even a large part of the Republic fleet were affected by the mass gravity vortex and drawn in, and all Revan and Surik could do was watch with horror as hundreds of vessels collided with Malachor's surface, causing the death of tens of thousands. The impact caused by the vessels crashing down at the surface destroyed the ecosystem of Malachor that was once a lush world, and fractured the core as the ships were crushed into the planet. There was such a large number of deaths that this caused a substantial wound in the Force, and Meetra Surik, being the closest Jedi to Horus who survived, severed her own connection to the Force to avoid dying to the resultant shockwave. She had managed this instinctually though, and after the utter devastation caused by the Mass Shadow Generator, the Mandalorians knew they could not continue, and transmitted their unconditional surrender. The aftermath. The war had ended and the Republic was celebrating. The Jedi Council were not celebrating though. They were wanting to cast judgment on the Revanchists. They really wanted to deal with Revan, Malak, and Meetra Surik specifically. Meetra Surik was the only one of the three who chose to return and face the Council. Surik did return and face the Council, but she was no longer one with the Force, but instead she had no connection. Surik was exiled from the Jedi Order and stabbed her lightsaber into the stone, formally giving up her role as a Jedi Knight, and went on to one of the galaxies not to be seen till the Dark Wars. Revan and Malak refused to summon to the Council, and instead decided to follow the lead that Mandalore gave them about the Sith, and their influence in the Mandalorian Wars. The pair took the remaining forces into the unknown regions which they claimed was so they could chase down the remaining Mandalorians. Revan had constructed a HK-47 assassin droid intended to assassinate selective opponents to prevent the need for larger battles. After Malachor V, he had wanted to prevent battles like this being fought again. Malak had wanted Revan to get his droid to assassinate Surik, but Revan refused, stating that Surik was already dead. Maybe this was due to her no longer being connected to the Force. Malak and Revan proceeded to Rekiad alone. They discovered Dramath's tomb that Mandalore had told them about, and they had found a datachron describing Dramath's history and that there was a hidden Sith Empire. In a twisted turn of events, Revan chose to leave the Mandalore's mask here, which was a great irony after this tomb was the catalyst for the war. After leaving the mask, the pair proceeded to find and follow the trail of the hidden Sith to the Empire's capital of Dromund Kaas. Once on Dromund Kaas, the pair attempted to kill the Sith Emperor to prevent his plan for invading the Republic, but they were defeated and the Emperor proceeded to dominate their minds and finish their descent into the dark side. That had started after they had found the Sith teachers of Malachor V. Once dominated, the Emperor prepared the pair to go back to the Republic as his advanced agents made them his servants, and dubbing the pair Darth Revan and Darth Malak. The first task was to locate the Starforge that they had found traces of on Dantooine. After leaving Dromund Kaas, they managed to break the Emperor's control not long after leaving the planet, but while they had broken from his control, they still adopted his will as their own unknowingly. They managed to find the Starforge in the unknown regions, and used this station to produce their fleet and recruited their followers from the Mandalorian Wars to allow them to form the new Sith Empire. One of their key officers who would be a key figure in the new Empire was Admiral Karath, who joined right at the beginning. Following this quick turnaround in formation of the new Sith Empire, in the year 3959 BBY, Revan led his new Sith Empire in the invasion of the Republic, and this would go on to become the Jedi Civil War. The consequences of the war. The weeks following the Battle of Malachor V, as the Mandalorians came to refer to it as, Ani La Akan, or Great Last Battle in Mandalore. The Mandalorians that had survived were stripped of their weapons and armour and were forced to dismantle their Basilisk war droids. The Mandalorians were unable to resume their fight and unify as Revan had taken and kept the Mask of Mandalore, which affected the Mandalorians greatly, demoralising them. The Mandalorian clans fractured and split, and many of their warriors went on to become mercenaries or bounty hunters. The clans that did not do this ended up vying for power and fighting amongst themselves. The years following, even though many of the clans no longer cared to resume their original goals, some clans, such as Clan Ordo, began their search for the mask, trying to identify any possible worlds that could have been reached within a 3-day radius from Malachor V. They started with a group of less than 50, which made the search of planets take as long as 2 years, which the first planet took to search, but when they moved from the first planet after 2 years, their numbers started to grow and increase from planet to planet. This became a defining moment for the Mandalorians, uniting the clans behind this goal and locating the mask. The Mandalorians would not search Raked till 3954 BBY, in which over 100 clans had unified behind the effort at this point. Revan lost his memories during the Jedi Civil War, and in his redemption while tracking down the Starforge, he eventually connected with Canderous Ordo, becoming friends and fighting alongside each other. Revan's memories eventually started to return, and he and Canderous started investigating those, including going to Rekiad in 3954 BBY, and they, with the help of Clan Ordo, located the mask. Revan convinced Canderous to take the mask and rebuild the Mandalorians to help protect the galaxy from the Sith Emperor and his plans to invade the Republic. Canderous accepted this role and took on the mask, becoming Mandalore the Preserver, establishing the headquarters on Dxun. The Preserver went around the next few years unifying the clans and rebuilding the strength. The Mandalorians followed their task that the Preserver was entrusted with by Revan by helping the Exile during the Dark Wars. And Mandalore the Preserver became a legend for getting the mask back, unifying their clans, and becoming a loyal ally of the Republic for a short amount of time. How much impact did the Mandalorian Wars cause? Many of the events that happened during the Mandalorian Wars were key in the causation of future events. Would Revan and Malak have felt the dark side and located the Emperor without the war bringing them out, achieving prominence and power through their efforts? Would Malachor V's hidden Sith Academy been discovered, and would they have started to be influenced by the dark side? Duron Queldroma had a vision while he lay dying of many of the future horrors that awaited, but also the death of Darth Malak at the hands of the Jedi Revan. So was this preventable, or would this always have happened? The war may not have been preventable, but the key figures in it may have been different. The Mandalorians' reunification was important to many future instances, such as the Dark Wars where they helped stop Darth Nihilus, the Old Republic when they yet again helped the Sith. The exiled Meetra Surik was a key cause of the Dark Wars, becoming a beacon for all the Sith in their hunt to extinct the Jedi. But what would have become of the exile if she was never at Malachor, not exiled and not becoming a wound in the Force? Thoughts. The Mandalorian Wars were 16 years of unrelenting Mandalorian advancement and aggression in the hopes of achieving the greatest victory that they had desired, to prove their honour and capabilities. The manipulation of the Emperor into pushing the Mandalorians was a great tragedy that nearly broke and destroyed the Mandalorians, but thanks to key figures such as Mandalore the Preserver, Revan and the Exile, this was prevented. Many systems faced devastation at the hand of the Mandalorians, Serroco, Duro, Jebble and Cathar to name a few. Many groups that managed to survive and carry on and show the resilience of the survivors, but even with all the devastation and the great lengths that they had to go for survival, this did not prevent future wars, with the Jedi Civil War coming a year later, and then the Dark Wars following that a year after. Well, this was my deep dive into the Mandalorian Wars, trying to summarise all the key events of the Mandalorian War. I did exclude like the sub-events that were going on, such as I didn't go into detail of Zayne Carricks and what was happening there, but I tried to keep to the key events of the war, the key battles, and I also tried to get a bit more information about the battles that weren't mentioned too much. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it entertaining, and any criticisms please leave down in the comments, and may even try and do more of this. As I say, there's always the Jedi Civil War we can talk about, or we can follow up later on with the Dark Wars, following Meetra Surik and her battle against the Sith Triumvirate. Hope you enjoyed it. See you later. Goodbye.
Oh, damn it. I suppose I won't get any rest until I talk, will I? You want to know why I don't trust anyone? Fine. Here goes. 5 years ago, the Jedi had just finished the war with the Mandalorians. Revan and Malak were heroes. I was damn proud to have served in their fleet. It was completely unexpected when they turned on us, invading the Republic while we were still weak. Nobody knew what to think, least of all me. Our heroes had become brutal, conquering Sith, and we were all but helpless before them. I mean, think about it. If you can't even trust the best of the Jedi, who can you trust? No, it wasn't even that. There were others. Good, solid men, trusted men who turned on us as well and joined their cause. Malak and Revan and the Sith deserve to die for what they've done, but the ones who fled the Republic and joined them are even worse. The dark side has nothing to do with why they joined with the Sith. They deserve no mercy. I know, and I should apologize to you. I've become so accustomed to expecting the worst in others, and you've done nothing to deserve that. It's just... no, never mind. Let's just continue with what we were doing. I'd rather not talk about it.
You want to hear tales of my exploits? Of the wars I've seen and fought, the enemies I've seen die by my hand? Sure, I'll humor you. My name's Canderous, of the Mandalorian clan Ordo. I've been fighting across the galaxy for 40 of your years. For my people, it is the honor and glory of battle that rules us. It's through combat that we prove our worth, gain renown, and make our fortunes. The Sith came to us with an offer, to fight a worthy enemy in a battle that would be remembered forever. Win or lose, as long as the fight is worthy, then honor is gained. The glory at having triumphed over impossible odds is what drives us. If there's nothing at stake, your possessions, your life, your world, then the battle's meaningless. We Mandalore take everything we are and throw it into battle. It's the true test of yourself. The battle against death, against oblivion. All life dies eventually. A true warrior is one who can beat it down whenever it raises its head. But times have changed now. The Mandalore clans have been scattered across the Outer Rim. The Republic is in decline, and the Sith Empire rises to take its place. The clans as they were aren't a threat, but the galaxy still fears us. People think we war out of spite or bloodlust. They don't understand, and fear that. We only wanted the challenge of the battle, and glory from it, win or lose. And we lost. But now I have no real challenges. Crushing Davik's enemies and the pathetic gangs in the lowest city of Taris could not be considered the most glorious of tasks. When I think of the battles I've fought, the thousands I've killed, the worlds I've burned, I weep for my past. We will never again speak of this. We've got work to do, so let's get to it.
Me? Well, I've been a star pilot for the Republic for years. Seen more than my share of wars. I fought in the Mandalorian Wars before all this started. But with all that, I've never experienced anything like the slaughter of these Sith on this constellation. Not even the Mandalorians were that senseless. My homeworld was one of the first planets to fall to Malak's fleet. The Sith bombed it into submission, and there wasn't a damn thing our Republic forces could do to stop it. I'm just a soldier. I go where the fleet admirals tell me to. I follow my orders and I do my duty. It's just... doesn't seem right that doing that means I failed them. I didn't. No, that's not what I mean. I'm sorry, I'm not making much sense. You probably mean well with your questions. I'm just not accustomed to talking about my past very much. At all, actually. I'm more used to taking action, keeping my mind focused on the business at hand. So let's just do that. If you have more questions, ask them later.